Hello and welcome to the Stranger Conversations podcast. Today, my guest is Pastor Paul Ernewein, Director and President of Forged by Fire Ministries, whose mission is to serve those in need by offering freshly prepared meals alongside acts of compassion. Forged by Fire responds to disasters, providing not only physical nourishment, but hope and spiritual care as well. His ministry has already served over 235,000 meals to people in need, with 5,000 meals already served so far this year, and we're only in the month of March. So, Paul Ernewein, welcome to the Stranger Conversations podcast. Glad to have you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tate, very much. I'm looking forward to this time.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. And I think I hear a little bit of an accent, but I'm pretty sure that you're from Louisiana, right?
Yes.
Louisiana. I don't, maybe I pronounce it wrong, but that's where you're from?
I'm surprised you pick up a little accent there. A lot of people like say you don't have an accent. I should have some kind of French coon-ass kind of, in my voice. And
I hear a little bit. I think it's not as strong as I was expecting it to be.
I don't say share and those kind of things. And no one says Nolans. So if you hear someone say Nolans, they're probably not from New Orleans.
That's a good tip. Is that where you're at, though? New Orleans?
I live in Covington right now. It's like 30 minutes north of the suburb of New Orleans. So we've pretty much lived here our entire life, except for my time at the seminary. We spent 3 years in St. Louis at Concordia Seminary. And in the Lutheran Church, you have like a vicarage year, an internship. And I did that in Chicago. So,
interesting.
I think, it's one of those things when you're from Louisiana, it's, you like, what I'm saying? It's kind of home. It's the culture's different here than a lot of places. It's really easy to get along with people. For the most part, everyone back here they're friendly. I don't know. It's, they always say New Orleans is kind of a melting pot. That's what New Orleans is known for. It's kind of in our food terms, it'd be gumbo. It's kind of everything, all the different, the different countries that contributed to the South and to New Orleans kind of all ended up in New Orleans and Louisiana. So, my dad was from Minnesota. So if I have any correct English, it comes from my dad. And my mom was the coon-ass from down here. So.
Yeah, that's it. I've never actually heard that before. It's called the gumbo, right? It's just a mixture of everybody. That's a good term for the melting pot. I mean, New Orleans is a beautiful city. I spent a few days there. That's it. But it was a great place, and the food was amazing. Speaking of gumbo, so great food there.
We do have the best. At least I like to say that we have the best cuisine in the country. And
awesome.
Whenever you travel outside, it's hard to find that kind of flavor, I think.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I fell in love with. Oh, sorry. I fell in love with po' boy sandwiches, the shrimp po' boy sandwiches. That's what I fell in love with. And I haven't had it, like you said, it's hard to find that somewhere else. I haven't had anything that I could say was comparable outside of New Orleans.
Right. Shrimp po' boy, that's my wife's favorite. Shrimp po' boy, butter only, and it's getting the right bread. It's French bread, and you go other states and you go to Sam's or a baker, and, you get this big, like a hoagie roll. And that's just too much bread. French bread, it's nice and crisp, like a baguette, at a bakery. And, some freshly fried shrimp, not overcooked, just right. That is a meal. And the best thing about it in Louisiana, you can go to a gas station and get a shrimp po' boy that's better than most restaurants. It's amazing, the food down there some days.
Yeah, heck of a place to grow up and spend your life. And so obviously you love it. I mean, you're still there after all this time, kind of spending, a few years in St. Louis, a year in Chicago. So, I guess kind of everybody gets drawn back to home a little bit. But as we'll get to learn more about what it is you're doing now, I mean, you do get to travel quite a bit with your organization. But,
Yeah.
I really want to know too, like what got you started in ministry? Is that something was that always your path? Were you always, a godly man going to church, or did you, I know there's two different ways. Some people are like that, and some people find God later on, or, through something bad in their life. So, what got you started in there? Kind of what's your testimony?
Yeah, I am definitely the Apostle Paul on the Damascus Road. So I grew up in a Catholic home, which is pretty predominant in New Orleans, and went to church, every day, graduated from high school, and I kind of quit going to church during high school and just didn't connect. I guess that would be the simplest way of saying it. I didn't feel connected. And so I was 18. By 21, I met my wife, my soon-to-be wife, right? We got married. I was 21. And she had a Baptist background, Presbyterian and Baptist background. And I had the Catholic background. And so we knew we weren't going to end up in the same church. And she had 3 kids when we got married. So I had an instant family to help and support. And, church was really, and I say church, God was really the last thing on my mind, to be honest. And he got pushed to the side. It took quite a few years. We got married in 87. It was probably the mid 90s that our kids, 2 of our kids ended up at a youth group at a Lutheran church. They got invited to some youth activities. And so my wife started going. And then at that time, my parents were still alive, and they would come over for Sunday evening dinner. And she was telling me one day after she was picking up from dinner, she's like, I'm going to a new members meeting at a Lutheran church. And I was like, what is it? Some kind of cult? I wanted to make sure. So I went, and it just kind of, from growing up Catholic to going to the Lutheran church, things looked the same. The pastors wore albs, there was acolytes, there was communion, they believed in sacraments. So it was really an easy it was comfortable. And there was some other stuff going on too in my life. I had a little niece at that time, Jackie, who had just been diagnosed with neuroblastoma. And so I was kind of beginning to question, things. And pretty much at the same time, I found my Bible. I still have it. It's right there. It's a little devotional Bible that my Nanan gave me, my godmother. We call them Nanans. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that term, but
I'm not. No.
Yeah, Nanan and Paran. That's what you call your godparents down here. So my Nanan gave me a Bible, and I started trying to understand, how does a 4-year-old have this horrible disease? And it got me kind of on a path. And I think God was using that at that time. So her disease, as horrible as it was, and then my wife finding a church home, and I just kind of started to go. And she got involved with the youth group. We both got involved with the youth group, and it just kind of blossomed. It was really kind of just the beginning of a journey, and I wanted to get more involved. I was a parts manager. I'm a car guy. I love cars, and my grandpa had a gas station. I hung out on the weekends, at the oil rack, just watching this guy Bob change oil and talking, about cars and motors, and of course high school. There was always some kind of drag race going on. I always tried to have something that could run pretty fast, and
absolutely,
fun. So when I was 16, I started working at a car dealership, and the guy who had the car dealership, he had Cobras and Panteras and Ferraris and Gullwing Mercedes. It was like heaven, for a kid in the 80s. I was
absolutely,
it was
all the posters hanging up in your room. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was Magnum PI lifestyle. I get to drive a 308 Ferrari some days, or a 928 Porsche, and so I had. I just stayed in the car business. And when I got married in 87, it was kind of like I stayed to pay the bills. And I was a parts guy, and I just worked my way up. So I went from cleaning toilets to running the back end of a dealership. And it was a great career. I just didn't feel like I was doing the right thing. I don't know how to describe it.
Yeah, like do you mean like fulfillment, or you just felt like you had something bigger in your heart?
Yeah, maybe a combination. This sounds corny, but I didn't want to die there.
Yeah.
I didn't want my obituary to read, Paul Ernewein, parts manager for 40 something years at Lamarck, Ford or Dodge.
Yeah.
We had a couple franchises, and I don't know. And like I said, my niece was going through cancer at that time, and I think it kind of just began to make me think. I have to honor, I was pretty callous, I think, for a period of time. I was worldly, I worked hard. My dad was a meter reader, for public service, the power company. And so we didn't really grow up with, I didn't grow up rich. I didn't need anything, and you can tell I didn't starve. So it was, but we didn't have, I didn't grow up with all the cool toys. I had my GI Joe, but I didn't have the Jeep with the cannon. That's like first world problems, right? But it's
That's right.
So when I started making money, I bought the big house, and then I bought the motorcycle, and I bought the classic car, and we had a pool and a tennis court, and it was just the life. It was just like grabbing for the next thing, and like I said, I think the Lord was prepping me for this isn't important. And my niece, towards the end of her life at the late 90s, my sister called and said there's not much else they can do. So we had taken in our other niece, her sister, while she was going through some extensive treatment. So she lived with us for a while, and it was kind of, our way of just helping how we could, because she was up in Virginia. And so my sister called and said, look, I want to come home. And I said, come on home. And so she spent the last 3 months with us and my parents, and Jackie. I became like her father. Her dad didn't make the trip. I don't know. He just, I don't know if he couldn't deal with it. My sister got to the point where she couldn't deal with it. So I was making a lot of decisions on end of life care. And we had 3 months with her, really good months. And I had a job where I could take off of work. So I used to go to some appointments with her, and she was so brave. She would get these, the full CT scans and she would sit there still as could be. And she'd want to go to the zoo, or she'd want to go shopping and just to look at things, or go to like a Barnes and Noble. She was a gem. She was one of a kind, and I always say that she taught me that life isn't about money; it's about time. And it was when she passed away like 3 days before her 9th birthday, and I really think that, I know you're not supposed to make decisions, right? when things happen, in your life, but it was really like this. Life's more than me selling auto parts.
New perspective.
And there was nothing wrong with that career. It was good, and the people were good, and I'm still friends with many of them. And I, it's part of what shapes you, right? It's your past. It is who you are, and I wouldn't trade it. I wish I had her back. But I think she just kind of forced me to go sitting with her watching a movie. She loved Aladdin, and I still cry when I hear a theme song from Aladdin. But that was more important than anything else. Like, she could care less about the pool or the tennis court or the car. She just wanted your attention. I had little like finger puppets. We'd play puppets together, and it got me to think about what's important. And I'd never been to college. I just went straight from high school to work because I thought I knew better. And so when I did start to explore ministry, the first question was, in the Lutheran church, have you been to college? I'm like, nah. And they said, well, you're going to have to either have an undergrad degree or 60 credit hours, and they accept 10% of the class in with a high enough GRE score. So it's like, okay. So for the next 2.5 years, I went to night school, and
Wow.
yeah, I scored well enough. I had like a 4.0 average there. I scored well enough on the GRE, and they accepted me in. I have a master's. I don't have an undergrad, but I have a master's. And in the Lutheran church, a master's degree from Concordia Seminary, we laugh because it's almost like 140 credit hours. It's like PhD level. And I was so unprepared for that, because my skill level was basically, a second year, or going into my third year of college, and I'm writing high-end master's, classwork, papers. And I had to learn Greek and Hebrew. That was a crucible, maybe? Is that a good word? God tests you in those moments. And we sold our house. We moved up there. My wife is a flight attendant for Southwest, so she sacrificed to make that transition to St. Louis. And then, God bless her, she's been there through all of this.
Wow.
Our kids, at that point, since, she already had kids, our kids were old enough. They were on their own kind of as far as, set with either careers or college. And so we made the transition to St. Louis, and, that's how I got there. It is a weird story for sure. It's not your everyday, I knew at 18 or I knew at 12 I was going to, be a minister, It wasn't in the wheelhouse.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody kind of has something like that. I think for a lot of us, it happens later in life when you realize, you kind of have more past than future, and you start to think about your life, and what you've done, what you've wasted, what you have left, because it's not much when you start getting older. And I just said this recently. Some things matter in life, and then some things matter at the end of your life, and those two things aren't always. They don't always jive. And so to have, this experience with Jackie and to kind of be with her throughout her young life, and then, kind of have her pass away and completely change the trajectory of your life. No more 308 Ferraris, right? No more Magnum PIs. Now you're in St. Louis with, a family and going to seminary. It's strange the way God works, isn't it?
Strange, yeah. That's one word I could use.
and I think
sense of humor.
He tests us, right? Yeah, sense of humor. I think he tests us quite a bit. And also, I mean, maybe he put a lot of that stuff in front of you. The life that you could have. Hey, look at all of this worldly stuff, as you mentioned, and the cars and the money and the tennis court and the pool, and then let's pull that rug out from under you because. Touching your heart, something in your heart changed. So, I mean, I think that's a beautiful story. And, and I mean, and look at you now. So what year was that when you went to seminary in St. Louis?
2003. I graduated in 7. Yeah. It's a 4-year program.
Wow.
And,
okay.
Yeah. So it's not really, they call it, you get a master's of divinity, which in the real world doesn't mean much, but it's on because of their accreditation. It's like 132 or 138 hours of work to get this. Yeah,
and then that qualifies you. That qualifies you to be a pastor in like a Lutheran church.
Minister. Yeah,
a Lutheran minister.
minister.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
It does.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's. From there, so they give you a call back into ministry. They give you your first call, and I was sent back basically to my hometown. I'm like 20 minutes away.
Wow.
So, which is good and bad, right? A prophet has no honor in his hometown.
But I can imagine.
For Louisiana, right? As I think I kind of opened with, it's unique, and I think it's hard to take, especially in the Lutheran Church. The Lutheran Church is kind of like a Midwestern religion, you might say. Like it's
Okay.
Chicago, Iowa, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It's concentrated, and to try to send a guy from, say, Wisconsin to New Orleans, that's huge, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's a different way of life. And so they sent us back, and I've often questioned that. How can you not? It's like I'd have loved to have been in Chicago. When we first got out, I wish I spent a year in Chicago. I loved it. I really thought that would be where the Lord would send us back. And He sent me back to where I came from. And
so in Chicago, you weren't a pastor at a church in Chicago?
I
just spent a
was
year
like,
there?
I was an intern, they call him a
Okay.
vicar. So
Okay.
I was the vicar at a church, and it was in Orland Park, so kind of South Chicago. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the culture. They were friendly. There was the whole north side, south side thing going on, baseball, it was fun. I could get into it. They like their pizza. I love pizza.
Yeah.
Italian beef sandwich.
Who doesn't?
So they're kind of foodies, different version of what we have. But I enjoyed it, and I'm still friends with some people. I was there in 2005 and 6, in that school year, and I'm still friends with some of those people. It was a good part of my life, and it did prepare me for ministry. Ministry really is, there's no clock on it. You don't punch a time clock. It's 24/7. And it's everyone, the common jokes in ministry is, well, pastor, I was at work in that one day a week. And then, they usually follow that one day a week up with, well, you only really work half a day on that one day, It's like, yeah. Yes.
That's right.
It is, that's all I do, just work on one sermon a week. That's all I do all week. I don't do anything else.
Yeah, very prepared, very prepared. Yeah, I mean, I think maybe they overlook the tending the flock portion of it, right? Being there with the people who attend your church and all the ancillary things that would bring.
Yeah, and ministry, ministry is messy, right? Because it's people, and people are messy, and that's what the church is here for, to bring the good news to those in need, and it's a privilege to be a pastor. And it's a privilege to share the gospel, and it is messy, but that's life. I mean, that's the brokenness of the world we live in, right? I mean, since the fall, if you believe in the fall, then in Adam and Eve, and the world's been in decay since that moment, and we see it every day. We see the craziness on TV. We see natural disasters. We see horrible things happen to people that don't deserve it, and people, they always want an answer, but it's hard to give the right answer. So all you do them is you point them to the Lord. He's the one that heals all things, and it is a privilege to bring the gospel. And it's just, you have to. My pastor that I started working with, his one thing he told me, he says, Pastor Paul, you're going to have to just love the hell out of people. And I was like,
literally,
literally, right? Yeah, it's hard because they're messy. It's most churches, churches are for sick people, right? They tend to be a first aid station, and they bring everything in from the outside world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a big job.
It is. It's nothing to be looked at lightly. I think everyone who desires to do church work should definitely drop to their knees and pray and see if this is how the Lord really wants me to go. In the Lutheran Church, there's Martin Luther wrote a book on, or a paper on vocation. How do we serve, say in your job or my job, how do we serve the Lord? I mean, so it's basically be the best that you can be. If you're a baker, you bake the best bread. If you mend shoes, you're the best, shoemaker. and that's how you were going to display your faith. Not all people are going to be pastors, and I think that's important to remember, because it is, some people strive for this, and I don't think anybody in their right mind strives to be a pastor. I think it's something that has a challenge, and the Lord. It's interesting. Maybe I shouldn't have said it that way, but I think the Lord equips you. If He's called you, He's equipped you.
Yeah, it's more of a calling.
Yes, it is a calling, and if He's truly called you, not the voice of James Earl Jones,
Right.
in the background, but the Lord working in your heart, the Holy Spirit moving. If He's called you, He's going to equip you for the task. You just have to bend to His will. It's His will, right? It's not ours. And that's kind of been, that even gets us, to doing what we do. It really wasn't, my mission was never to do this full time. It was kind of a hobby, and with our food ministry and spiritual care, it was just something that was going to be like a mission part of the church, just an outreach. And it just kept growing, and the opportunity came to do it full time, and we took it. But it is
Oh, sorry. So you're no longer part of a church, but you now have the Forged by Fire Ministries as your full-time thing. Yeah,
that's my full time. Yeah.
And one thing I do want to say a couple things too. Talking about like it being a calling. You hear that a lot. Like God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. And I think when you said, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said it that way, I do think that some people probably do know from 5 years old that they're going to be that, but they're very dedicated, and I think that they have that calling, whether they even if they knew it a long time before, but some people come to it later on in life. But I was doing some math in my brain here. So you came back to New Orleans, I would assume, 2007. So Hurricane Katrina was in like 2005. Was there still a lot of devastation, jumping into some of the Forged by Fire ministry, and you're helping with disaster relief? Was that part of what got it started, or was it totally random?
No. So it goes back to the automotive world. When I was a parts guy, I had a good friend that I worked with who got out of the parts business. And back when we were working in parts, we used to always like dream about what we would do if we escaped. If we get out of this building, what are we going to do? Well, one guy escaped, and he started doing catering, and we were good friends. And so I would go help him on weekends and things just for fun. He had a big smoker. We could smoke like, I don't know, 50 turkeys at a time, and he had jambalaya pots, to feed a couple hundred people. And so I would, goof off with him. And so when I went to the SEM, I bought a small pot, I say small pots, 20 gallons. And I took that with me. And so I would cook for the seminary campus. And then, so when I was on vicarage, my year in Chicago, that's when Katrina happened. And we had family back here. My parents, our oldest son lived here. Our daughter was on the coast. She was a nurse. And so, of course, you couldn't get through at that point. There was zero information, cell phone towers, nothing was working. And so we finally found out they were all okay. Our son lost his house, had a tree go across it. My parents were okay. And so while we were in Chicago, the people of Chicago were so great of this church. We brought down a 26-foot U-Haul filled with food, pet food, cleaning products. And we brought down a team, had some guys come down. They cut trees for neighbors. We distributed all this food. And then I called my friend that was the caterer. I said, look, I got money. Would you like to serve some food? So we set up at a church, and we fed a couple hundred people that day. And that was kind of the first start for it, you might say. And it just kind of kept, at the SEM, I would cook every year for the graduating class. And it was just a way of giving back to the community. I still do that to this day. I go back every year and I cook for the seminary. I feed the entire campus. It's 300 to 500 people. Yeah, it's I don't want them to think they're forgotten. It's when you're studying for that type of work, it's lonely. And so I remember when I was there, people would come and bring the smallest little gifts, just whether it's bags of fruit or things, and it just meant a lot. So that's always been my thing. I've told them as long as I'm living and breathing, I will be back every year, and I throw a party. Um, we Sometimes
That's
we do
great.
shrimp and grits, we do jambalaya, we do snowballs, or we'll bring another dessert. We'll do beignets. Yeah, I throw
Wow.
a little festival for them. I call it Jambalaya Fest.
Yeah.
And yeah, and we invite the whole campus, students, faculty, staff, families, yeah, anybody that's there. Strangers walking through the campus, we'll feed you. So
Yeah. Hey, it's great when you love food yourself too,
yeah, yeah,
it seems
good and
like you
bad.
really enjoy, the food aspect of it and the cooking and everything.
I enjoy seeing people smile.
Yeah.
It's there's something to that. I like to take care of people. It's that Southern thing, maybe. You know, if I believe if you throw a party, you don't run out of food, right? If you come to one of my parties, there's no running out. We'll have extra, but we'll send it home with you. You
Yeah.
don't run anything down to the last sandwich or bowl of food, and so that it just kind of kept building. And so when I was a pastor at a church, they knew that I'd been, I'd go up every year and cook. And then we had a men's club and we started cooking more and doing community events. And then I finally just took and Moore, Oklahoma happened, the big tornado.
Hmm.
And we I ended up getting in a wreck on my motorcycle like a week before. So I couldn't go, but I sent my team up there and they went, some of my guys, and they fed the community in Moore. And then it's kind of been since then. We went to Baton Rouge in 2016. They had some extensive flooding here. Houston had flooding in 2016. 2017 was Harvey. And we would cook for 3 or 4 days, come back home. I preach on the weekends, reload the trailer, and then head out to Houston, cook for another 3. We did that for like a month. And it just opened my eyes to this is a whole ministry that really impacts people, and people are appreciative, and they want to know why you're here, and why are you doing this, and it's a great opportunity to give witness to your faith. I do this because I can, right? I do this because I'm a Christian, and this is the way that the Lord has called me to serve, is to love you, so it just kind of grew. It just kept growing. And then, in Louisiana, I think in 2020, we had like 4 or 5 hurricanes, and we just kept serving and still preaching, and everything was really just, it was working fine. And it got to the point where I had an opportunity to do this full time. And it's one of those things. I'm not a big risk taker, and I get scared. And my wife was behind me, and she's like, let's do it, and so she has the insurance. So
Right. It's always our wives who are the smart ones and see the right path to take us down, isn't it?
She
Yeah.
is.
And I'd say, on the website, so Forged by Fire Ministries, you have a website. It's called We Serve Hope, right? WeServeHope.org. And on there, it says our why. It says respond, feed, serve, equip, restore, and repeat. You've definitely done the repeat part. It sounds like you were really busy to get to the point of even stepping out and doing this full time, and 235,000 meals that you've served. And also what it says on the website there, your mission is that serving others through faith and action. So obviously you're going places, you're serving stuff. How else does Forged by Fire really do that? Serve others through faith and action. I think you have more than just food, correct?
We have, and so we noticed after really Harvey was where it hit. Most of my volunteers at that time had been through Katrina, had been through it. Even growing up as a kid, you go through so many hurricanes. It just not that it becomes easy, and you can never say those words like, I know what you're going through, right? That's not appropriate. But most of my volunteers understood. And we had some people come up in our line who were, you could just tell they needed to talk. They were at wit's ends, they were just either crying, or you could just see it. It's one of those things that you just pick up on. And so I started letting some of my volunteers that had been through, the Katrinas to just say, look, take a break from the line and go talk with them. And if you feel comfortable, pray with them. And so that's kind of how it started. It was just, you see the obvious need that these people need to talk. They need to process what's just happened to their life. Everything that they own, especially where we're at in Houston, was on the curb, because of the flooding. And it wasn't necessarily wind damage. It was just flooding. And flooding is a mess, and you place your life on the curb. And you have to deal with that. And so like I said, most of my people had lived it. They understood it. And so they were able just to be a shoulder. And that's how it started. And so now we call it more spiritual care now. And I recruit pastors from local churches where we're at to help with that. And we have like outreach Bibles, we have devotionals, we have all types of material. We now have crosses. We do cross necklaces, and there's a great story there.
Is this the crosses for Benny?
Crosses for Benny.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that story.
So I've always been kind of, I told you I'll tell stories in a circle. So growing up in Louisiana, you live through flooding events. I almost died in a flooding event as a kid in the 70s, late 70s. I rode my bike into some flood water, slit my foot completely open. I was a couple, maybe a mile or two from my house. The street was empty. I looked around. There was nobody around. A couple of houses up, I saw a lady on a porch. She saved my life. She wrapped me up. I was crying. I was probably 11 years old maybe. And she put a towel around, and then she pinched something on the back of my leg, down by my ankle, basically, I guess, stopping the blood flow. And eventually, it was before 911, they got me. And I remember hearing the doctors in the emergency room saying, he wouldn't have lasted, another 15 or 10 minutes or whatever the time was. So I was I always remember that. I remember hearing the doctor say that. And I was just bleeding, just sliced the bottom of my foot open. It was gross. And from that moment on, I kind of, I was always heavy. I don't know. I use that as my excuse. I'll just say it that. I was always the fastest kid in school until that moment, right? I was tallest and fastest. Yeah. So I just steadily gained weight, and I eat, I think, to deal with things. It's a mechanism for me. And so I started trying to lose weight back in 2012. And I was losing weight, and I met this guy, Benny. He and his wife, Sherry, they were accomplished athletes. They hiked the Appalachian Trail. They had done Ironman races, marathons, and we became friends. And what I always loved about Benny is he didn't see me as this big guy. He just saw me as a guy, and he said, well, we need to do a half marathon or something, or we need to do triathlon. I can't remember what I did first. And I was like, okay, well, I don't know how to swim. And he said, well, I'll swim for you. We'll do a team thing. And so we did it, and
wow.
I kept trying to lose weight. And the next thing it was like, well, let's run a half marathon. So we did a half marathon. And then it's like, well, come on, you have a beer and some nachos. And it's like, let's do I really want one of those jackets from rock and roll, the rock and roll marathon is your jacket. So we did a marathon, and then it's like, well, why don't you do a half Ironman? I said, okay, I still don't know how to swim. So I learned how to swim in 6 months. I did the half Ironman.
Wow.
And then it's like, let's do it. I've done Ironman. You could do an Ironman, and the old expression, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So 2016, I did an Ironman in Texas, and I finished. I have my ink.
All right.
But I didn't want that. I finished late. I was 14 minutes late, and I never got it. I never got inked, because I didn't feel like I finished, you know. And a couple of years later, I was doing an interview with Ironman, and they were like, there was a former world champion, and he was listening to my interview for Ironman, and he was like, "You ran the course, didn't you?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Get the tattoo." Yeah, if Van Leerda says I can get the tattoo, I'm good. No one's going to complain.
That's right. Got permission.
Yeah. It's one of the few sports where you compete on the same playing field as the professionals.
Mm-hmm.
And Benny was just this guy. He could encourage. I'm telling you, he could encourage you to do anything, and in a good way, not like get you in trouble.
Yeah.
But he never saw obstacles. And the one thing I learned about all these Ironman people, I guess they're all type A's, maybe, I don't know, but they don't see obstacles. They don't see. I mean, literally, right? Anything is possible. That's kind of the mantra of Ironman, and it instills that. And when you take that back into the real world, not a lot of people are scared. Well, we can't do that. And I remember doing an interview with me with Ironman, and they asked me something about cooking because it was right after Harvey, and they said, "Well, could you feed 5,000 people tomorrow or something like that?" I was like, "Sure." It doesn't scare me. I can feed 5,000 people. It doesn't scare me. It didn't scare me then. It doesn't scare me now. But Benny was that guy, and then during COVID, he got cancer, and he wasn't scared. And I had gotten his cross, and there had a lady at church that used to make these little cross necklaces, and I wore it. And I'm sitting there talking to him in the hospital, and he'd gone in for like a hernia, and when they had complications, and they found this mass, and of course it was cancer. And so I prayed with him, and I saw him looking at the cross, and he comes from a Christian home, and he wasn't there yet with his faith. He had some doubts, and so I gave him that cross, and this went on for, I think, probably about 2 years, and he passed away. And the beautiful thing about this was, I was there when he passed away. I was holding his hand. I was talking to him. And my wife was there, with Sherry, his wife, and we had just came to visit him, and it just, so for the funeral, his parents told me how much that cross meant to him, that he never took it off, that it gave him hope and comfort. And before he died, he made his profession of faith. He took communion. He acknowledged who he was and who he was in Christ, and it was really beautiful. And it was like a gift that he gave me. And and I wanted to give that same hope to other people. So I have people make these cross necklaces. They ship them to us, and they can give them out themselves. They don't have to ship them to me. It's just a great outreach tool, and there's so many people that need hope. There's so many people that need to cling to something that's not going to fade away. And these little crosses, as it did for Benny, I hope it does for other people. And so we give them that. And I do. I love sharing that story, when somebody will ask me about those crosses. It's because it's his life story. I mean, I know it's the Lord's cross, but Benny found comfort, in that cross. And I think that's true for all of us, what the Lord has accomplished. If you're a Christian, right, what the Lord has accomplished for you, and that you don't have to do it. You don't have to bear all that weight. I've met so many good people, and I often wonder, I look in the mirror and go, why am I still here? I mean, I don't know about you, but as we get older, right, as you say, we get to that other side of the clock, and I look back at all my friends that are not with me anymore, and it's like, what did I do to deserve, to be here. It was just freak luck,
Yeah.
Is the Lord, the Lord saving me for a purpose. And I went to get a vacuum cleaner one day. I'd take out my driver's license because, I hate spelling my name because I talk slow. I mean, I talk soft. And so I just handed the guy my license, and he says, "Oh, you have some sisters?" I'm like, "Yeah, I got 4 sisters." And so he said where he was from. He was from my neighborhood.
Hmm.
And I just asked him the random question. I said, "Hey, you ever heard a story about a kid almost dying?" He's like, "Yeah, that was my mom." So this is like now, I don't know,
Wow.
40 years since this happened. And he says, "I'm going to tell you something better." He said, "My mom, she didn't work. And she met my dad on a blind date. My dad, he developed something for the oil field, so he didn't need her to work." And I said, "Well, that was nice that she was, able to be there for me." And he said, "Yeah, she passed away, but he said, you know what she went to school for?" I said, "No, I'm here. I'm all ears." She went to school to be a nurse, and she practiced medicine one day to save your life. And when you hear stuff like that, as you said earlier, I think before, there's no coincidences.
Yeah.
I, I hate to think that my niece, had to go through cancer to save my life, and force me to think about how I was living, and I think it's a miracle that God put someone in my life when I was 11 years old to save my life.
Yeah.
And when I think about it, it's like, boy, I've wasted some serious time screwing up. I've got
Yeah.
to get on track. I've got to work for him a little bit better. You
Yeah.
know,
And you never
it's
know. I mean, that's what when you think like all these terrible things that happen and people want answers, sometimes those answers come 40 years later. Um,
yeah,
it's I mean, it's not, that's why they always say, it's God's plan. It's not our plan. And it takes a lot for us to figure that out. I mean, even look at Benny, he
right.
comes into your life, he helps you lose weight, maybe even have said saved your life, but he also saved your mentality, the way that you think nothing's impossible. And now you're feeding 5,000 people. You need a little bit more than a couple fish and some loaves of bread, and to do what you're doing. But he's kind of pushing you without maybe having that mentality come from Benny, and then you kind of saved his life before he passed. Maybe none of this really would have happened. And I think it's just there's no coincidences, and the answers often come when you think they're never showing up.
Amen. And and I'm I'm glad that the Lord used me in Benny's life,
Yeah.
to make the gospel um, understandable for him. For him to understand forgiveness. I think he needed to hear that. He needed to understand forgiveness, and we all need that. I mean, who amongst us has not sinned? Who amongst us doesn't need to hear those words? You are forgiven, and that's important, and that is the beautiful part of being a pastor, and being able to do that, and even do that now in what I continue to do. I'm telling you, the people that you meet, because disaster relief is a small portion of what we do, because disasters only happen a couple times a year. So I do a lot of stuff in
Yeah.
the community, and it gives me a little freedom to help people. We have boxes that we make for people who are suffering from food insecurity. We build these little shelf stable food boxes, and we're a small organization, but we try to make an impact every way we can, and that's I think that's what the Lord put us here to do. He didn't put us here to sit on our hands. you know David Goggins. I'm assuming you've heard of
Yeah,
him.
absolutely.
Yeah,
I got his book somewhere
he has.
behind me.
Yeah, yeah, he says it. I think one of the books in the audio. I listened to it at the gym. Back then, and he was like, I don't want to get to heaven and have God ask me, what did you do with your talents? And I'm like, okay, well, theologically, maybe that isn't maybe the right way to look at it, but you know what? In the Bible, it does say that you're gonna give an accounting to you of your life. The Lord has covered your sins and paid your debt. But He might ask you a question, and
Yeah.
I've always thought about that. It's like He's giving us gifts, all of us unique gifts, and
Yeah.
how are you using the gifts that He's given you to further His kingdom and to help our brothers and sisters? It's not, the whole world doesn't revolve around me. There was a time when I thought it did, but it's not. And I credit my wife. We both credit the Lord, but my wife, you've heard some of these crazy adventures. She's been there. She sat outside Ironman races waiting all day for me,
Yeah.
to either finish or DNF, on the last mile of the run. She's been there when I, quit my job. Well, a nice job at an auto parts store to go into ministry. She's always been there. And
Yeah.
that's the Lord putting someone in your life that's going to support the craziness, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm with you on that one. I think that's a pretty common theme amongst men, right? I mean, maybe you don't always deserve God's grace, but you're going to get it. And we definitely don't deserve our wife's love sometimes, but have a great woman full of grace. It's very similar,
Yeah. And
the mission of,
Mhm.
of Forged by Fire, I already said that, right? Serving others through faith and action. The vision is to be the hands and feet of Jesus. And, maybe explain that a little bit. How does Forged by Fire, and your volunteers, because they're coming to give their time for this mission, how exactly are they, kind of echoing Jesus in that manner?
Well, I like to think that, when Christ walked the earth, right, that of course, he did miraculous things. Right? He fulfilled the prophecies, but he cared for people. He spoke to them in love, in truth, but in love. He tried to physically, to take away. Um, he tried to bring comfort, right? Like if you're hungry, he fed the 5,000, right? So I think, when I say to be the hands and feet of Christ is to fulfill, he's called us to love our neighbor, and that's it. As he goes into the story, right, with the Lord, what's the greatest commandment, right? Or when he's talking to his disciples, what's the greatest commandment? Well, love the Lord your God with all your heart. And then he kind of throws, this is, I guess, I think on Holy Thursday, right? Um, but let me give you this other one, is to love your neighbor, right? As I've loved you. And which means sacrificial love, because the Lord has poured out on his disciples this love and compassion. And I think that's what he's called us. And it's that other commandment to love as I have loved you. So I think for us to love people, and we go to disaster sites, there's no questions asked. I don't ask your background. I don't ask your denomination. None of that comes up. It's just, I'm here to love on you. And sometimes I go back to communities and I say it. We go back, like, say, on anniversaries, and we'll cook for them, and it's just my way of loving on a community. And so that's how I feel. And to be able to share the gospel when the time arises, if someone, we pray with people. And I always say, you want to learn about a community, pray with people. You will find out everything about a community if you just offer to pray, because you will find out that there's, low unemployment. We go to a little town called Selma, Alabama. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. And they had a tornado a few years ago. Yeah. And we go back every year. I'm going back on Easter Saturday to cook for them. And, you pray for so many people, and it's a common theme. It's unemployment, it's housing, it's relationships. It's, you learn. And so what can I do? I can't fix them all, but
Right.
I can let them know that they're cared about that day. And I
Right.
think that's important, right? I mean, am I providing, you know, I'm not a big enough organization to provide relief for a month or two. I don't have that kind of funding. But if I can give them, you know, I used to say it's a bowl or a meal, it's hope, right? And it's hope. And as Christian, I have hope in tomorrow. And you know, in the secular world, hope is an important thing, not just for Star Wars fans, right? You know, there's always hope in rebellion. But, you know, it's as a Christian to share hope and the hope that we have in Christ, but the hope in a better tomorrow, a brighter day.
Yeah.
And that's what I like to think, that when we give someone a meal, when we pray with someone, they're not forgotten. And I
Yeah.
get that a lot. I get people that say, just, you know, thanks for being here. You know, I don't know why you're here, but thank you. You know, a lot of times, especially when we go into neighborhoods that are kind of maybe forgotten by the mainstream, especially in disasters, you know, big organizations like big PR and smaller communities get left out, and poor communities get left out. And, you know, I don't look like you. You know, why are you here? You know, you don't look like us.
Mm-hmm.
No agenda, just here to love, you know, just here to feed you. And so I think that's being the hands and feet of Christ in the world, you know.
That's beautiful.
And yeah. So my ultimate goal is a comfort village. And I'd like to have a place where, you know, if a disaster happens in your community, where you can come onto our premise, maybe a village, I mean, you might say, and if you need a shower, you get a shower. If you need laundry, you get your laundry done. If you need a meal, you get a meal. If you need spiritual care, you know, spiritual care. And just if you need to just sit and get out of the heat, you know, or warm up.
Right.
So we're building a laundry trailer this year. I got a grant to construct a laundry trailer, so we'll be able to offer free laundry. Yeah. So
I mean, in an emergency, I mean, that's something that you wouldn't really think about, you know, but that has to be a huge need.
It is. It is. It's so many of these things, you know, that it's interesting. Yeah, the things that you don't think about until you don't have it, you know.
Right.
A shower, you know, if you're in a rural area that's been flooded and everything's on a well system, you don't have water, and so you're not taking a shower, you know. When Ida hit here a few years ago, I could have used a shower trailer then. There were so many people when we were serving in a little town called Lacombe that didn't have access to showers, clean water, and the water stayed high. You know, they didn't have electricity, and so, you know, it's these things, you know, to open your eyes, see the practical, you know, and it's important, you know, and a clean, you know, to have a nice clean shower, to have nice clean clothes, and a warm meal. Some people after a disaster, they go for days without anything warm, you know.
Right.
And so it's I know, look, I'm not a fool. I have big visions, right? I have big ideas, and it takes work, and it takes finding the right donors and people that buy into this, that have that same desire to help. And, you know, that's always the challenge, is finding those right people that really have a heart for this. And thankfully, you know, as we've grown, the Lord keeps continually, you know, placing people in my life that say, hey, I want to make this happen, you know, or, you know, here, I know this place can give a grant for this. And there's a lot of corporate stuff, you know, a lot of corporations want to help. And so we're a public charity. I'm not a church. I'm a public charity. So it makes it a little bit easier for some businesses to give money. But it is I think it's an important mission.
Right.
And that's why, you know, I don't think again, I think if the Lord led me this far, he's not leading me to the valley of bones, you know.
Exactly. So,
and
you know, and it does take so many people to accomplish what it is that you're doing. I mean, you're talking about, feeding thousands of people in an emergency situation. I mean, even just getting to the site to make that happen, all the logistics, coordination. What exactly does volunteering with Forged by Fire look like? When people get involved to help you, what are they doing? Are they traveling with you? Are you getting people at the site themselves to help? Explain that a little bit.
Yeah. So if say we're going to Houston, or say Asheville, we were in Asheville after Helene, and so I traveled with, say, 6 people, and I can probably use 15 to 20 to serve large quantities of food, and the rest came from either the central part of the United States, they drove in, or some came from the East Coast, which wasn't really affected, and they drove over. And so we usually partner with a local church, and then we use their parking lot. And then there's usually a church, if it's not that church, another church locally that will have housing. And you basically bring your air mattress and you're camping. You'll eat good.
Yeah.
Can't promise your sleeping accommodations will be that great, but air mattresses. So we have 2 trailers that like a toy hauler. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So we have a kitchen trailer, we have toy haulers, we have a food truck. So we have various pieces of equipment. We have one trailer that has 2 showers in it for volunteers, and so we pull in volunteers from kind of outside of the area, because most people that are in the disaster, they need help, right?
Yeah.
So you don't want to be a burden on them. You don't want to come in and say, well, I'm going to need your volunteers. Even though I'd like to have someone from the church there to hand out the meals, it's not a necessity. So the volunteers that I usually pull in just to help serve, they just have kind of a basic intro, what to say, what not to say, a basic, if they're handling food, almost like a little miniature serve safe class on, what to do and not do while handling food. And then they're off to the races. And I can teach anyone. I can teach you how to cook for 1,000 people. Give me 3 hours, and you'll be, serving a big pot of food.
And I saw the pots on your website. It's pretty impressive. You're feeding thousands of people like jambalaya, and it looks like you're, this major pot with a long thing you're moving around. It's impressive.
And it's a jacuzzi for a small person.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Do you get invited to these places, or do you just say, hey, there's a disaster, we're going? Or do you have to get invited? Is that part of the logistics so that they have a place for you?
The logistics. I usually work with either a network. So I'm a disaster coordinator for the church in this area. So I handle Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and the Panhandle. So I kind of wear multiple hats, to do this full time. And so I'm responsible for disaster response for the Lutheran Church. So I work with my counterparts in other areas of the country, and they'll say, hey, we can use you in Asheville. The VOAD, the government system has gone out for volunteers. We need food in this part of Asheville. Or say in North St. Louis, there was a tornado that went kind of through St. Louis and cut up through the poor section there. And so the church body, called and asked if I would come help there. So we drove there, and so there's always a connection to a local church. I just don't show up. It's a lot of equipment to move just to show up, and people do it. And sometimes, you don't want to be the next disaster.
Right.
First responders have their responsibility. I'm not a first responder. God bless them. I need to make sure that, I can get in, and I am not going to put a strain on the system. I'm not taking a hotel room. If we need water, we need to bring water in. In Asheville, that was the case. We had to have water trucked in. The water system was gone, out of the way. So
and when you mentioned that, one thing I had heard, and I've never been a part of a disaster recovery effort. So in Asheville, I had heard that so many people came to help and took hotel rooms that a lot of people who had lost their homes had nowhere to stay. I don't know if that was true, but it seems very logical that could happen quickly. Everyone's so eager to help that sometimes you're a burden. Like you said, you try to not be the burden on the system.
No. And in the Lutheran Church, that's how we operate. We don't we typically use a church as a base camp, and most organizations will do that. I know in Southern Baptist they work with a church, and they'll set up their recovery efforts out of a church, and everybody brings an air mattress, and sometimes you have to bring a shower trailer because most churches don't have showers, and that's the drawback to a church. But you don't want to be a drain on the system, and you've got so many people trying to get hotel rooms if there's an area, because like even Asheville, there was parts of it that were wiped out, and there were parts that were kind of on the fringe that weren't, or just a little bit south that was okay. And it's hodgepodge. Houston's the same. Houston's so big. You could get a hotel room in Houston. You could go to Sam's, and then you look across the interstate, and it's total devastation.
Yeah.
Sometimes these disasters make no sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting with the tornadoes. Like you said, I mean, it hits where it hits, and everything else is fine. So
yeah, they clear. Tornadoes are scary. Hurricanes. I've ridden out hurricanes, and you feel it. You feel the weather change because the pressure changes. Your doors rattle. You see things moving. Tornadoes, they don't leave anything behind. They are scary. I've seen the destruction, the paths, and it's clean. I mean, it's a clean path, and it's nothing, and you don't get any warning. That's the scary.
Unpredictable,
and no warning, and you just have to be lucky, I guess. I don't know how you survive them, because we don't have tornado rooms. I mean, they always tell us down south, you go to the middle room of the house. Put a bicycle.
Yeah, a friend of mine. Yeah, right. I remember getting some warnings when I was really young in Virginia, and same thing, go in the middle, get in the bathtub.
Right.
But it was pretty rare. But a friend of ours moved to Tennessee, and they actually have a tornado shelter that bolts to their garage floor, so they can go into there if they had to, and it shut the door, and it's all metal boxes. Pretty interesting. They haven't had to use it yet, but if you be glad to pay the money for it.
Yeah, they're scary, and none of this is light, anything to be taken lightly. Flooding, I'm sure you see videos of flooding. The force of water is, one of my biggest fears when I, started to learn how to swim, and I could also, I could swim, I could stay in a pool, and Ironman racing, they have, varied courses, and I always stuck to the courses where the water was fairly calm.
Yeah.
Like Texas, somewhat calm. Arizona, somewhat calm. Open water swims scare me. I mean, because water is, I don't know what else is swimming in that water. I don't want to find.
I'm with you. I'm not a water guy.
yeah. But it is, it is interesting how the force of water, it'll move a house off a foundation.
Yeah.
And after Katrina, it stacked bridges. So, the bridges that cross the lakes around here, let's just say they're, 50-foot sections or 30-foot sections. It stacked it like dominoes. It lifted them off of their piers and stacked them.
Man,
I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just what it can do, and people think they're going to ride out a storm sometimes, and it's like, God bless you. I don't know. I don't see it. There's no award for riding out a storm.
Exactly. Well, and it's such a blessing, if when they're safe, obviously, like we've been talking about, it takes a long time, maybe years, to kind of understand, what that is. But, it's what a blessing to have you and your organization show up to be able to help them. I did want to mention one thing before I forget, because I thought it was really interesting how you said, if you want to know what a community is going through, pray with the people in that community. And the reason that was interesting to me, it was that my wife and I, we're Christians, and we've been going to this Bible study with some friends of ours. And one of the things that it was challenging us was to pray together. And that wasn't something that we've ever done. So, pray separate, I talk to God, but to sit down and actually pray out loud together. And my wife had mentioned, oh, it's so interesting because now I see what you're going through or what you're praying for. And that struck me when you said that. I mean, and this all just happened in the last week. So just to hear that, you go start to pray with the community, you do get to hear, their troubles and hardships and the things that they're looking for, in life.
Yeah.
So, yeah, very
it's
interesting.
The things that burden us on our heart, right? It's the things that we need to unload. And I think that's what prayer is, right? It's just a conference. I always think of Fiddler on the Roof. Why us? It's talking to God and just bringing everything that's crushing right here to Him. Say, you got it. I know you got it. I need to get it off of me.
Yeah.
It's great. It is something so simple. Everybody can do it, right?
Yep.
I don't know why we don't.
Yeah. Sometimes easier said than done,
Yeah, true.
And I also wanted to mention, just that, kind of the way that we became connected was I was literally sitting with a friend of mine at a small place in Phoenix, and my friend went up to use the restroom, and there was a nice couple sitting next to us, and I just started having a conversation with them, and turns out that they were here in Phoenix. Yep, Julie and Marty Stark, they were here in Phoenix to help you, and they explained what it was that you were doing. And I thought, man, I have to meet this guy. This is this is amazing. They were talking about making jambalaya for 3,000 people, and it all seemed amazing. And then when I took just one glance at your website, I thought, wow, this guy's really doing amazing work. And like I said, I don't believe in coincidences. And I did take something else off of your website, where it says, literally right on your website, it says, if we met, it was for a purpose. And, the way that I got connected with you through people who are helping you through your mission, I just think that's really great. And, I think anybody who goes and explores your website, any social media after hearing this podcast, they might want to, explore on how they got connected with you as well. And part of that is, how can people get engaged with you? So, how does somebody get engaged with your organization? Kind of find out what you're about. Is it the website, weservehope.org? Is that the best place?
That's it. Yeah. And there's my email's on there. There's ways to volunteer. It'll show you, the path to volunteer, but you can always reach out via email. And one of the things that as we move forward, I'm always looking for somebody that has some really culinary backgrounds too, because that's, as we try to grow, that's a great way. But, Marty and Julie, Martin and Julie, he's volunteered on the chainsaw side, the debris side of disaster work. And I knew he was traveling, and I said, well, if you're in Phoenix, and he really wasn't going to be in Phoenix, and they just have such a good heart, such nice people. And I said, well, and he's like, oh yeah, we'll be there. They stopped on their way to Palm Springs or something, and worked with me. So but the website's the easiest spot, and it'll kind of show you different ways to volunteer. And even if it's not with me, I encourage people, there might be another organization locally for you, because I'm a small organization, but there might be one right in your town, that is doing something that needs a volunteer. Just don't volunteer, on Christmas or Thanksgiving, right? It's a life of service. That's what the Lord's called it. I see you have tattoos on your arm, and I have a tattoo on my arm here, and it's in Greek, and it says Paul, servant or slave of Christ Jesus. And I wrote that, Tattoos are nothing to take lightly, right? You're living with this the rest of your life. And I always wanted to be a reminder, who do I serve? Who do I belong to? I belong to him. I serve him and his purpose. And that is to, love my neighbor. And this is the way we do it. So the website has information. You can always reach me. I love talking about what we do. I answer questions. And I try to encourage people, because I don't have 50 Forged by Fires. I don't have chapters in every, state. So I just encourage people, hey, if you like to serve, come up with a menu. I'll walk you through it. We've created like 4 other ministries. They're not under my brand, you might say, but it's not important to me. They're out there serving, and so we have one in Minnesota. We have a group out of North Carolina. We have one in Alabama, one hopefully in Missouri, maybe by the end of next month, and one in Florida. So people are interested, they want to, and you don't have to be a millionaire to do this. You just have to have a heart to serve, and give back. It doesn't hurt to know a millionaire.
Yeah, right. But man, that's fantastic. Well, I really appreciate it, and it's really great, all the work that you're doing, Paul. And I will definitely make sure that weservehope.org is linked in the show notes. So if anybody listening would like to check that out, I think on your website you have Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn accounts also. So very great. I would encourage everybody to check out what it is you're doing and to potentially get involved or to donate time or money. And one of the things, kind of finish this off on the website, you say, when disaster strikes, that you guys respond with love. And, I think it's pretty clear after talking with you on this podcast, and, that's not just a tagline. I mean, during this podcast, you've shown nothing but love for all the work that it is that you're doing. And, really just extremely happy that I had a chance to meet you. I wish you all the best, and may God continue to bless you, all your volunteers, all those that you've been able to serve, and the ones yet to come. So, Pastor Paul Ernewein, it's been a pleasure to meet you, and thank you so much for your time.
And thank you to all the people who are listening, for taking that time, to an hour or so of your life. I appreciate that. It's very special to be invited and to share with you. Thanks.
Great. All right, Paul, have a great night.
God bless you. You too.
You as well.
Thanks.